Three Body Problem is Netflix's much anticipated new show and the follow up to Game of Thrones from the showrunners Benioff and Weiss. And I always kind of felt bad for Benioff and Weiss, who I felt get no thanks despite creating the biggest show of this generation. Like they were sacked from Star Wars unceremoniously just because of fan reaction to season 8 of Game of Thrones. And again, nobody's just taking the time to go, you know what? We all actually absolutely love that show. We were delighted when House of the Dragon was good because we got Game of Thrones back. Um, but these guys have kind of been almost like their reputation has taken a massive hit as a result of it. So interesting to see them back. And I was I was rooting for them if I'm being honest, because again, I kind of appreciate creators and I can allow them space to fail if they go down swinging, which I felt that Game of Thrones did, even if it didn't fully land the plane. This show could not be further from Game of Thrones in terms of setting and tone, given that instead of being kind of medieval fantasy, it's a futuristic sci-fi thriller. But it's similarly ambitious in a lot of ways, and it attempts to adapt a novel that was once thought to be impossible to take to the screen in the Chinese Hugo Award-winning book of the same name by Lucien. Apologies if I made a balls of that name. The reason people thought it was impossible is because it's a story that tries to saddle centuries in scope in a macro level, and even pertaining to the kind of main set of characters that they focus on, we're still covering decades worth of stories all within 8 episodes, and I don't think any of them go past the hour length, and if they do, it's literally an hour and 1 minute or 2 minute. I don't want to give too much away in terms of the plot, but it's the type of show that Netflix loves on one level. It's big, it's expensive, it covers a really wide berth in terms of setting, as the streamer notoriously hates to kind of localize any of its content to potentially alienate viewers in a way that can be really clunky at times. Like if you think of Sex Education's weird British high school that looks nothing like any British school you've ever seen before, but enough like an American high school that anyone who's ever watched a high school drama can relate to it. But unlike a typical Netflix project, this isn't big and dumb. It's actually, for me, prestige TV at its finest. So it's interesting to experience that through Netflix because we haven't really got to do that in a while. We start the first episode learning of a series of suicides from leading world scientists as the Earth seems to be facing some kind of existential threat that teases itself out over the opening episodes, zooming in on one group of scientist friends in particular who operate as our point of view characters and untangle a lot of the plot via a mysterious virtual reality video game. Two of them were sent and have no explanation for, but get addicted to nonetheless. Meanwhile, they're being quietly watched by what appears to be a government agency of some sort, who seem to think this is all connected to the death of the scientists. To combat the potential inaccessibility of the story, I feel that Benioff and Weiss put a lot of energy into that. And they call up some familiar, likable Game of Thrones luminaries and the likes of Liam Cunningham and John Bradley, who, if you don't recognize those names, that's Davos and Sam is probably what you'll know them as. Well, you've got Marvel alumni Benedict Wong also providing a welcome, familiar face. And this tactic, to me, really fucking works. It really grounded this show, and getting talent of that caliber and people so likable and fun and enjoyable to watch. It was an excellent move. One thing that kind of saw me late to the party with Game of Thrones was that the genre was something that at the time, now I'm much more open to it because of Game of Thrones, but at the time, the genre alienated me a little with kind of thoughts of it being like a medieval setting, dragons in kind of a similar ye old England, and you have kings going to battle for the realm. Like I remember I watched one comedian years and years ago when Game of Thrones first got big saying that they lost me at the word realm. And I kind of felt that at the time. And of course, I watched it, ended up becoming an absolute obsessive freak about it. I've read all the books since, nerded out totally. I present the podcast. Like part of like why I do this podcast is because I loved doing a Game of Thrones podcast previously. I'm gonna say this is quite similar. If you feel that sci-fi isn't your bag, and if I described the plot, you might be put off it. So similar to Game of Thrones and all the people who assured you who mightn't have been into fantasy stories but end up loving that show, I'm going to say this, just trust me. This works. You need to watch it. I read up on the concept a bit beforehand, and while I was always gonna watch, I expected it to be something that was quite heavy and something I had to take in small doses. Like I wouldn't be able to binge it on Netflix, to try keep up with and try like read and research at the same time. So I was expecting it to be quite a dense watch, but that's actually not the case at all. I think the most remarkable thing about this, when you consider especially the source material, everyone's like, you cannot adapt this, is it's such an easy watch and follow despite the story. It doesn't compromise. I haven't read the book, but for me, it doesn't compromise on the complexity of the story. And again, like I'm not a scientist. I don't understand. I got like a C in like ordinary level physics in the Leaving Cert. But everyone that I ask and everything that I've read since says that this is also scientifically sound. Benioff and Weiss have really heard the concerns of people that people had, and they've listened to this. And some of the ways they address it made me kind of roll my eyes a little bit. Like they do that thing that you'll get, and Christopher Nolan tried to do it a little bit in Oppenheimer by making like Cillian Murphy this sex god, of trying to make science seem like cool and sexy. And that's not to say that scientists in any kind of depiction on screen should all be kind of typical nerd archetypes. That's a really dated stereotype, but you've got a character in this, Augie, who is frankly a preposterously attractive person for her job title, while they go to pains to show how much casual sex another character, Saul, gets because of his big sexy brain. It's just like, okay guys, right, we get it. You think science is cool, all right, that's fine. You don't have to overegg the point. But the main thing that makes this show an easy watch for me is that more than anything, it's funny. Like every single episode, you get a steady stream of laughs, particularly from Wong or John Bradley, who both really draw you into this show and make it tick along nicely. Wong's character, for example, wouldn't be out of place if he was in If Anybody Watches Slow Horses, because he's that kind of sarcastic, quippy, but also hilariously cynical cop type who's excellent at his job, but nothing else in life. And he, in particularly, makes the show tick to the point that when he's not in it for long periods, particularly towards the back half of the series, it all works a little bit less effectively. Not to say that it doesn't work, but you do miss Wong when he's not in it. But what for me made me realize how successful this show was that for as fantastical and kind of wide in scope as the plot is, like you've got murders, you've got secret worldwide government conspiracies, you've got red wedding style twists, you've got journeys through centuries with some historical figures showing up, you've got philosophical questions. Like one of the main kind of underlying themes of this is kind of similar to the global warming question. It's like this, the actions we take now may damage future generations of society. So should we do something about it now, or should we just go live our lives and go, well, we're not in immediate danger. So like, what are you going to do? That sounds like their problem. And again, you've got people who do and people who don't. And kind of, again, it kind of goes both ways. But no matter how big that is, the show really hums and feels unbearably tense when you strip it back and you've just got two characters talking in rooms. Like there's one scene that I think of, for example, where one character is talking to another on a kind of radio, and they're talking about the nature of lying and why people may lie, and if lying is a necessity or if it makes you a fundamentally untrustworthy person. Again, very similar to that Game of Thrones type of way where you think of kind of chaos as a ladder and stuff like that. Conversations that really make you think about bigger picture stuff. There's also like a threat looming that may not be fully realized for decades or even centuries, and yet somehow throughout the show, like right up until the very end, they managed to make everything feel so urgent and like all of humanity could unravel at any moment. It's got like kind of it kind of mixes that global warming kind of theme that I spoke of with almost like Independence Day level. Oh shit is hitting the fan right now and people need to do something. And then on top of that, you kind of zoom in and you just care about the minutiae of the lives of the characters involved. Like you care about Wong's relationship with his son, or if one character is going to finally express their love for another before it's too late. And just the little things also kind of click and work at the same time. And that's the thing. nothing about this show and what they're going for from the mini to the major should work, but it does in a big way. And though it's nothing like it to watch, the show kind of reminds me a little bit, in terms of the story of it more than anything else, of The Leftovers, which was Damon Lindelof's follow-up to Lost, after the latter, similarly to Game of Thrones, got panned a bit when it finished its series, because the last series, people said it didn't land the plane. But this, like The Leftovers, is a big, ambitious swing from creators who've recently come under fire for not landing the plane with the world's biggest show. But while you might expect them to be nervous and kind of blink and overthink things under the weight of pressure from having to follow up that and kind of still prove their competence despite creating an absolute monster, instead what you get is actually a really mature, confident, ballsy turn from now experienced, accomplished showrunners who've learned all of the right lessons and picked the right next move for themselves. This is an absolute triumph and will absolutely end up on my top 10 shows of the year. Maybe very near the top, maybe even at the top. I haven't even started to contextualize it. I literally just finished it last night before recording this. And I am personally delighted to see Benioff and Weiss, who brought us one of our all-time favorite shows, to get their victory lap here. So check it out, guys. I cannot recommend it enough. It's Tree Body Problem, and all 8 episodes of season 1 are on Netflix now.